Hi, this is Roger in Finland, and today we're taking a look at the Viltrox 23mm f1.4 for Sony E mount. And for the impatient ones, the Viltrox 23mm f1.4, it's fast, it's optically good, it's affordable, and it fills a very nice void between the 16mm and the 30mm f1.4 from Sigma. As usually, I do have more use for my camera equipment in general for video than for photography, so that's going to be the focus. And actually, this has become my favorite focal length to shoot these kind of talking head videos. So right now, the reason why I'm not holding the lens here and just trying to show it off to you is because it's mounted on the A6400, and it's the lens that I'm using to record this video. It's set at f1.4, so you can get a guess of the sharpness. I do have an ND filter in front of it, which we're gonna be talking in a different video, so I'm not sure if that's gonna affect at all the image quality, but that's something that maybe we'll test later also. As the focus is for video, I'm gonna be talking about that mostly, and thinking about the autofocus. The autofocus is very, very fast. It's kind of noisy, so if you have a microphone just by the lens, that might be a problem, if that's your use case. But the Sigma 30mm is also a bit noisy as well. So it's a bit of a draw in that regard, comparing those two lenses. It does change and work very, very well with the different drive speed settings of slow, fast, and whatnot. So if you do some focus racking with touch to focus, this lens works perfectly fine with the Sony bodies. One parameter in lenses that I personally appreciate very much is the short, close focus distance. And this one can focus up to 30 centimeters. It doesn't quite give it a semi-macro kind of thing, but it's okay. When it comes to sharpness, and mostly for video, that is just what I use, it's actually getting very difficult to find lenses which are not sharp enough. So this, you can see now at f1.4, shooting in 4K, even if I'm releasing the video in 1080, but this is more than sharp enough for me already at f1.4. And as usually, things get better when you start stopping down. Then bokeh. That's obviously a personal taste. At f1.4, the balls are round if they're in the middle, and they start to get like cat-eye shaped when it goes to the corners. And by the way, the green thing that you can see here is a color cast because of these are Christmas lights on a Christmas tree. So I haven't quite tested deeply in other scenarios, but I'm sure that it's gonna fare much better than this. And then already at f1.8 and f2, the blades are visible. Even if it has 9 blades, you can see the edges, so they are not rounded, if that's something that matters to you. And one thing that impressed me very, very much optically is that it has very, very little focus breathing. I didn't expect this from a lens, which is the photography focus, which is a very, very much of budget lens from a third party, and at this price point, the focus breathing is really, really well controlled. Then when it comes about the build, I did mention that it's made all of metal. It feels good, maybe not as good in my opinion than the Sigmas, but it's still great. The focusing ring is big and it's well dampened, but again, it's focused by wire, which I don't like for manual focusing. And then it comes from probably having been released as a Fuji lens or lens for the Fuji system first. It does have an aperture ring, which a click or a position that is for automatic aperture, and then you can set it manually. It's clickless, and for people that do use that for video, that's fantastic. I personally never do aperture racking, so it doesn't help my use case, but for those people that like to use clickless aperture rings for video, this lens does have it with all the benefits of being a modern lens with autofocus. The complaint that I have here is that when the lens is set at the automatic mode, that works fantastic, but if you move it just a little bit, like pretty far away from the f16, it jumps into manual mode and it jumps into f16. So if the camera was in the back, it might be that you just bumped it and you moved a little bit the aperture ring, you turn it on and something is a bit funky. So be sure if you want to use automatic aperture to set it manually and set it correctly. And very quickly going through some of its physical attributes. In size, it's very, very similar to the Sigma 30mm f1.4. It's 72mm long. It does have a filter thread of 52mm, if that's important for you, in case you have step up or step down rings and then other filters, and it weighs only 260 grams. And all of that while being really well built and made all of metal. And 23mm in aps-c, it gives the equivalent field of view to a 35mm in full frame, which is a very, very much well used and common focal length, which is by the way missing from the Sigma trio. So Sigma has the 16, 30, and 56, which the equivalent in terms of field of view to full frame are 24, 45, and 85-ish, more or less. But I think that this 23 millimeters feels very, very nicely avoid between the 16 and the 30. And actually, this is a really good answer to the question, I don't know what to get, the 16 or the 30. Well, if you can only get one of them, maybe you should get the 23 from Viltrox. I haven't mentioned it earlier, you might have guessed it by the size of the channel, but nobody sent me anything for review. This is not sponsored absolutely by anyone, and I bought very, very happily this lens with my own money. And even if I just said that it's all metal and well built, and the Sigmas aren't all metal because they have a plastic construction outside, I still feel that the Sigmas are better built, if it makes sense that there's a better plastic than a not so good metal, I suppose. It's something about the feel. I can put my finger on it exactly what it is, but I feel that the Sigmas are a little bit better built. With that said, since there's no alternative from the Sigma line, well, this is kind of a no-brainer if you're after a 35mm equivalent. For Sony, there is an alternative, which is a 24mm Sony Zeiss f1.8. It's a little bit slower and it's much more expensive, so I'm not sure actually if it qualifies as an alternative. Let's take a look at the brand, Viltrox. They do a lot of stuff. They do accessories for camera and video equipment in general. They do lights. They're probably best known for their affordable alternatives to the Metabones speed booster, so focal reducers. And nowadays they're also the third-party brand that has developed the E mount for the Z-Cam flagship cameras. And they have started also making lenses. I believe that they started for the Fuji aps-c system, making autofocus lenses, and they do have this 23, there's a 33, a 56mm as well, and now they are porting them bit by bit into other aps-c systems. I think they're only available for Fuji X and Sony E, but anyway, they are the two most relevant ones. They do have also an 85mm f1.8, I believe, with autofocus for Sony cameras, and I think that that one covers actually full frame. And the fact that they have started releasing them for Fuji X first, I think it's quite visible in the design. And then about the price, I got it for about 270 euros, which is a very, very nice price for what this lens offers. At least around here, the Sigmas go for about 350 or so. So this is almost 100 euro cheaper than that series. Because it fills a nice void, I would recommend it anyway. If there would be a straight competitor from the Sigma line, I think it would be a much, much tougher choice to make because these offer some advantages, including the economy, but the Sigmas are also very, very good. At this price, which is similar to the Sigmas, at this focal length, which complements it, I think it's a fantastic addition to a nice collection of f1.4 primes. So what about the alternatives? I'm gonna take my notes because there are a few. And when it comes to aps-c, as I mentioned earlier, there's just one, which is the Zeiss 24mm f1.8, which goes for 700 euros, which I think it discards it as a competition. And then anything in this focal range, let's say 23, 24, you need to go basically to full frame equivalent lenses. So if you're planning to upgrade to full frame later, might make sense, but I think it's an overkill because they're huge and they're expensive. The Sony 24mm 1.4 G Master, it's 1,600 euros and it's huge and heavy compared to this. The Samyang 24mm f2.8, which is a full frame pancake lens, is 300 euros, more expensive than this one, way, way slower. So again, not an option to consider. Then we have the Sigma 24mm f1.4, which is 700 euros, and again, same problems than the Sony G Master, gigantic lenses, they're designed for full frame, makes sense. Then they have released recently a 24mm f3.5, which is very much video focused, but that's much, much slower, and it costs 550 euros. So if you're thinking about an aps-c lens, like this Viltrox is a much better and affordable option. And finally, there is a Tamron 24mm f2.8 for full frame cameras, and again, it's much slower and it's 400 euros. So all the full frame options, rightfully so, because they have a lot more design challenges because they need to cover a bigger sensor, they're a lot more expensive, and if they get somewhat close to this in price, then they are much, much slower. So what I would say that if you're after a 35mm equivalent in terms of field of view for Sony aps-c cameras, you will not find any better option regardless of the price point. Definitely a great recommendation. So what are my conclusions? This is easily becoming my favorite lens for the Sony system to shoot this kind of talking head videos for YouTube. And then when it comes to choose a prime for walk around photography, I choose either this one or the 30mm f1.4 from Sigma, because they are around the range that are my preferred focal lens. I really pick one or the other depending on how I feel that day. So this is totally recommendable if you're after this type of focal length for Sony system. I hope you liked the video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and we're gonna see you soon for some more content.